Guys, so good to be down here at Bayside. This is our home away from home. We love you guys. We got asked to do this because they were really looking for somebody who's figured everything out. And they said, whose marriage is perfect? Let's go. Get the Clarks down here.
Yeah, we've been married 18 years and it didn't take long before we realized we were in trouble. We were probably 3 months in and it was the first time I left the house in a huff and said I want a divorce. It's still actually tender for me to talk about, but it was a Sunday afternoon. This is 18 years ago. Sunday afternoon, and I had made a roast beef dinner for two. Fancy afternoon. I did all the fixings, and then Mark came along, and he decided he'd be helpful and played it for us.
Sounds good.
With no respect for boundaries. My potatoes were touching my corn. The meat was touching the potatoes. The gravy covered all. Who puts gravy on corn? Not me. Clearly, there was some underlining issues there.
Yeah, clearly someone has underlying issues.
In that moment, I lost my mind. And with no joke, I was out. I was like, I've made a mistake. We dated for 5 years, and I didn't know until now the disrespect that you would have for me. You clearly don't love me.
Yeah.
And that's how we started.
All right, so there you go. So that's how mental we are. That's how crazy we are. So glad you're part of this thing. Listen, let me give you one big idea here. So a couple of years ago, we were going through this really difficult moment on staff. We had a bunch of stuff we had to deal with, and we had kids that were sick and all this kind of craziness going on. And I was in a hospital, and one moment Erin and I were there, and I kind of just freaked out on a nurse. I just kind of lost it. It was, I just had all this pressure. And Erin, as we walked out, of course, radiant and perfect, Christ-centered person, looked at me and quoted a sermon that I had given the week before. And she said, "What are you trying to do in the world? Are you trying to make a point, or are you trying to make a difference?" And I was like, shut up, all right? Just like, why do you talk to me in this way? Regurgitating my own stuff back to me. But the point is as you guys are here today through this series, through this conference yesterday and today, we were over at Blue Oaks on Friday night, last night, and this morning doing some content for them. And what a just dirty campus over there. Because we did this Q&A. And it was, I was like, wow, these people are, anyway. So we're glad to be with you anyways, you fine people. But anyway, so one of the big things we got to talk about is how do you actually make a difference in your marriage versus just making a point? Because oftentimes we're driven by just making a point. I'm right, you're wrong, whatever. So here's one of the big ideas that we want to talk about. It's being active versus passive in the context of your marriage. You got to be active versus passive. You got to be American versus Canadian, right? Like in Canada, we're super passive people. Like we just sit during COVID, we just sit in our homes. We're like, please government, tell us when we can come out and we'll obey you. And you guys are like, screw the government, it's our freedom, baby.
At least that's what the news tells us.
So like, boom, 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 right? So you guys just pass COVID around to each other. We'll show COVID what's what. And so that's the image.
My Canadian part of me is shrinking right now. Yeah. Please don't say this. Please don't say this stuff.
Yeah, it's like, this sounds really, so.
We don't talk controversial things.
So we want you guys to actually be super American and active when you're dealing with the issues of your marriage. You can't just sit back. Listen, we don't drift towards success and flourishing in life. You drift toward destruction. Mm-hmm. What it takes is actual super intentionality to make something flourish. And just the fact that you're here right now tells me you want to be intentional. You want to grab this thing by the horns. I don't want to just survive in my marriage. I want to actually thrive and flourish. Because what we tend to do is those moments like at a conference or something, they'll go, these people were married for 50 years. What do we tend to just naturally do?
Yes. Right?
We just clap. Why? Is anyone asking a follow-up question like, is it any good? Like, You survived. Awesome. You hate each other. You think up ways how to murder each other every other day, but you've been married for 50 years because it's easier. That's not something to celebrate, y'all.
Yes, we need to be intentional both in marriage and in our parenting. 6 months after we got married, we made the cross-country move from Toronto to Vancouver, which most people don't know Canadian provinces or cities, but it's basically New York to California. So we make the full drive. It would have been crazy for us to just hop in the car. We knew our destination, but it would have been crazy to hop in without a plan. Like, how are we actually getting from point A to point B? Especially at that point, I still thought every time you turned right, it was north. Somebody would be like, okay, just go north. And I'm like, so you want me to turn right? No, just go north.
It's natural, y'all. It's natural.
Yeah, it is. I wear it well. It would have been not bonkers, but yet for some reason, so we went in, we didn't have smartphones, so we went into like CAA back then and had to sit down with somebody to teach us how to get from point A to point B with our triptychs. Of course, there's still roadblocks along the way. We still had to figure out, okay, for some reason, there's always water mains that have burst all over. So always construction, it's like, okay, we got to make a detour here. And we go back to the map to figure out how to get there. Why is it that in the trivial things of life, like driving across country, planning a trip, we put in so much effort to the details? We're not just looking to the destination. You're not just showing up in Mexico and going, we'll just see how it goes. No, you have a plan.
Probably don't show up in Mexico right now at all. It's probably the better.
You have a plan. So we need a plan in life. We need our own roadmap. And so I highly recommend to everybody, we've done this in our house, is to have a vision for your family.
Yeah.
Sit down together. And this is like minor things and big things. Is where do you see yourself 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What are the character traits that you want to see built into your kids? Do you want, one of ours is, I want to be friends with my kids 20 years from now. I want my kids to come home, drop their stuff and be like, I like this place. Like, I feel safe here. So how are we creating that environment? I can't just assume they're going to come home if it's not a fun, joyful place to be. And so we need to put in the hours at the beginning of time to figure out, okay, we've got our vision. Now, what are the steps in order to get there?
Yeah, so we got to take control of the situation, control your marriage. Don't just be a victim of circumstance. Don't just blame your spouse and your kids and the way you were raised and your parents and your family and your kindergarten teacher. If your marriage isn't very good, you got to go, how do we actually flourish in this? Which means sometimes you might have to go to counseling. Erin and I go to counseling. We tell our church this. It's like we need help in the context of our marriage. Now, sometimes she misunderstands why we're going. Like literally the first time we went to counseling, it was like 2 hours of unpacking our stuff. And on the way to the car, she goes, man, I won. I was like, it's not.
I did, however, win that round.
Not how counseling works. Anyway, but you got to be intentional. You got to work on it. Our friend who's a divorce lawyer, she wrote a book a little bit ago. She's a Christian divorce lawyer. And here's what she said. She said, 95% of the couples that have sat in front of me have said, if I knew how difficult and time and money, all the things that were going to be spent on this, I just would have put that into my marriage. I just would have taken the time, the energy, the money, and put it on my marriage versus this situation now, because this is a disaster. And so that's what being intentional is. That's what being active is. You got to be saying, if something's broken, we got to actually figure it out. So we have a couple big ideas for you. One of the big ones is, a flourishing marriage is not gonna happen by little tricks that you learn at conferences. It's gonna learn by one big idea, attachment. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the psychology world. Dr. Sue Johnson's done a lot of work on this, on attachment theory. And it's the idea that when you get attached to someone, you're gonna do everything you can to fight for that relationship well. But if there's detachment from that relationship, then it's not actually gonna work all that well. And so you think of the idea of a kid, for instance. Like when you have a baby, you create those attachment moments right off the bat. And then if other people do, it kind of weirds us out. Like my buddy, his mom, back in the 80s, there was a church service and they had everybody in the church service, and they couldn't get in touch with the moms, and there was these little kids, and so she had a baby, and the baby was crying, and they couldn't get the mom out of the church service. So this guy I was talking to, his mom just started breastfeeding a random kid. It's like, this guy's brutal. It's like, no, right? Now, that doesn't even sit in our brains. It's like, what are you talking? It's like, the hand that rocks the cradle. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't want but why does that sit weird in our brains? Because we don't want our kid to attach to somebody else. That's what attachment is. That's the power of it. And what we got to try to figure out is, in the context of marriage, don't now get the breastfeeding out of your mind, all right? I like this guy. He's got great ideas, honey. All right, so it's attachment to each other in three big ways, okay? This is what we want to talk about. So here's the three big ways. You can write them down. They're all based in the book of Genesis. Genesis 1, 2, and 3. God lays out this couple, Adam and Eve, and there's three big ways that they're supposed to have attachment and close relationship. First, spiritually. You have to have spiritual connection to God. Of course, God puts them, he says, I want to walk with you in the cool of the day. And then you've got to spiritually actually connect to each other. You gotta share that love for Jesus. We're going after Jesus, and sometimes what happens is, like, the wife will go hard after Jesus and be like, hey, I want to actually, and then the husband's kind of lagging behind, and she'll get a stack of books and she'll put it on his bedside table about how to have a better marriage and how to walk with Christ better. Here's the thing, what's gonna happen to those books, right? They're just gonna grow dust, and he's never gonna touch them, right? Because it's not your job to play the role of the Holy Spirit in your spouse's life. You gotta be leaning into Jesus and going, I need my husband, I need my spouse to actually have a spiritual relationship that's the same as mine, so you're actually walking this thing out together. Your job, this is very important, my job with Erin is to not just make sure she has a good 80 years on this planet. I'll give her a good house, I'll make sure we have good kids, we'll get out of them. It's to make sure she has a good 80 million years with Jesus when she passes away, and then the 80 million after that, and the 80 million after that. So I wanna see her actually develop spiritually so that she treasures these things, so she has greater delight for 80 billion years, not just making sure, we cocoon and have this great life for the 80 years in front of us. That's the spiritual component of your life.
Yeah, and when we think spiritually, often we think tools, we think moments of sitting together, doing devotions together. We often get asked as a pastor's family, what devotionals do you do with your kids? What devotionals do you do together? And I'm like, you mean like daily? Because that's not our thing. And I don't mean that we're not in the Word together. I don't mean that we're praying together, but we don't do it in a way that might work for your family.
Well, we tried once. We did this Bible app where we were reading. We said 1 year Bible app. We'll do it together. And then you know how you click off like you're done that chapter. Well, I got a little behind, and I went over on her iPad and I saw that so I just kind of clicked backwards so that she didn't know that she's like, why do I keep reading Genesis 18? I don't know.
That's a true story. So we're both 8s on the Enneagram, and so it always was a competition. If we try to come together and do a devotional, I'd be like, why are you preaching at me? I know. I grew up in the church. I've read my Bible longer than you. Yeah. Don't think you know more. It just didn't work well. But
Devos don't go well for us.
No.
Right? So,
but when we're in the Word and we're spending time, we're having these great conversations about God, about what He wants for our lives. We're challenging each other spiritually. And it's the same with our kids. I'm a homeschool mom, so I'm teaching them in this way. We do Bible classes and that. But what I find is their spiritual growth, our spiritual growth together, it's coming in those everyday moments. It's coming in the conversations of how are we weaving God in and out of these moments in time that we already find ourselves in. One of our missions as a family, so if we go back to the vision that we have, is to be vocationally on the same page. I want our family to know how to serve and love those both within our community and abroad. And so we spend our money, where we spend our time is in that way, in serving others with our kids. And we always go back to this, when we stick to this vision, what happens is we can parent and we can do this out of love and not fear. Because we can go back to our blueprint. We can see okay, does this fit? Does this align with what we want for our family? And those little decisions of, should our kids be in rep soccer 5 days a week? Well, does that align with everything else? We have this saying that I got from my friend Julie, and it's, the chatter doesn't matter, the vision makes the decision. And every time we're in a situation where we're like, does this align?
Right.
We go back and we go, the chatter doesn't matter, the vision makes the decision. And so when the world feels like it's exploding and it's out of control, we're able to come back and be grounded in, okay, our vision, the umbrella of our vision is God and Him wanting us to serve Him, follow Him. So if we're safe within that, then we can move forward. So when COVID hit, and being in Canada, you probably saw the news, we were on complete lockdown. No one was allowed to come in of your houses. Pretty much no one was allowed to go out of your houses.
We're not even allowed down here right now. We're just
don't tell
the government we're here.
We're allowed. But it's interesting world out there. But right when it happened, it was March, everything was completely locked down. We've got kids that struggle with Tourette's, tics, so 2 of them. When this hit,
I don't know where they got that.
They can tell, they see it. My girls and I were coming back from a missions trip in Uganda. We spent time there with our friends there, and we had to go through Paris, which had been shut down, and my kids had all these facial tics that they would do. And of course, people good-hearted would call our parents, would call and be like, well, it's okay. You'll be fine to get home. Just don't touch your face. And my kids are like,
yeah, don't tell someone with Tourette's not to do something.
I'm like, why are you doing this? So they were already at this all-time high. Our home became like this bubble for them. They loved the rules. They loved that we couldn't go in, they couldn't go out because they were concerned. We were working through all that. And then all of a sudden we get this knock at the door. And this woman shows at my door just weeping. And she's like, I didn't know where to go, but my husband just hit our daughter. We've just left the hospital and the police station. I need your help. And I'm standing there calculating, going, I know this is a big deal, but a hospital you just left? A police station you just left? And now you need my help. She's like, my kids are in the car. Can we come in? I'm like, oh gosh, I've got kids that are struggling with anxiety. I had to stop and go, what is our vision? It is to serve and love the people in our community. I couldn't turn her away. I couldn't look at my kids and go, sorry, we're not helping. So we invited her in. I took her out back. My kids sat with their kids while their kids shared their day and what had happened in their lives. By the time they left, my kids were just a mess. They're like, why would you do that? We're not allowed to do that. Yeah. Their dad hit them. And I could have looked at them and go, I will never do that to you again. I will never do that. I know we didn't follow the rules. No, I looked at them and I said, guys, God has called us to love our neighbor more than ourselves, even when it hurts us, even when it feels, even when it's messy. And we were able to have these amazing conversations. And this is what I mean by this spiritual side, is we're able to have these conversations about God and what God calls of us and how, wow, like your dad wouldn't do that to you, just like our heavenly, and we are able to pull these in. So having those every day, stay on your vision.
And when you start growing spiritually together closer to Jesus, what flows from that, and this is a big issue probably in this room at some level, is forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Once you start understanding how much God has forgiven you, and you really kind of gospel yourself day in and day out, then how can you hold something against your spouse? And I guarantee in this room, there's people holding stuff against one another right now, right? Almost every wedding I do, someone gets up and reads 1 Corinthians 13, right? It's like, it's usually grandma up there with the King James or something, and thou hithereth loveth, and everyone's like, what? But it's like, love keeps no record of wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there's someone needing some forgiveness today out there. It's like, you should never be heard saying, last year you did this to me. Last month you said this to me. It's like, Every day, the slate gets cleaned and you say, this is a new day to move forward, right? I was reading some guy the other day, he said, the only thing you get by looking back is a strained neck. You gotta move forward because yes, of course you're married to a complete narcissist. You're married to a gong show. They are sinful, narcissistic, depraved, turned in on themselves. All they think about is themselves. What did you think you were marrying? That's what marriage is. It's basically you saying, out of the 7 billion crazy people on the planet, I choose to forgive you the most.
When I was pregnant with our third daughter, I had health issues leading into kids, and so I had to have C-sections. And I remember, this is my third, so if you're a woman in the room who's given birth, you kind of know what's happening. And Mark was at a lunch meeting about half hour away, and I called him, I'm like, Mark, I'm going into labor. And when I go into labor, I'd need to get in because they have to do a C-section, and we couldn't let it get to a certain point. And he's like, I don't think you are. I'm like, no, I am. He's like, no, you'll be fine. You'll be good. And I'm like, Mark, I am telling you right now, I am going into labor. I need you. And he goes, yeah, I'm in the middle of a lunch meeting. Is there any way you could just meet me at the hospital? I'm like, you know what? Click. I'll figure this out on my own then.
But hold on.
Hold on. There's clearly it's kind of a black and white situation. It's no gray area here.
We had just planted a church, okay? Now, usually when you plant a church, like we're 1 year in. So when you start a church from scratch, okay, in Canada.
Just don't compare it to giving birth to a baby.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do that. Okay. But let me mansplain for a second, all right? So now I've planted this church, all right? And I'm like, when you plant a church, like the only people interested are 19 years old, they live with their mom, they don't have a job, and unless you let them play guitar, they get mad at you and leave and start a blog about you 3 weeks later about how you're so authoritarian and mean. So here was a guy with a job, and he looked functional and competent, and I finally got a lunch with him. So I'm sitting there at lunch and I'm like, I'm about to keep a functional human being at my church right now with a family and money. And then this one calls saying, well, there's a baby coming. I'm like, why? No, not now. So I hung up and I was like,
I hung up.
You hung up at me and the guy says,
I'll have my baby myself.
The guy says, so what was that? I go, my wife thinks she's having the baby now, but let's finish our lunch. And this is why you should hang out with older people, because he goes, dude, you need to get the bill and get out of here. This is gonna pay dividends in the end if you just leave. So I called you back like half hour later and said, okay.
I'm still laying on the floor.
Okay, we can do it now. Anyways.
I had her
Point
2
being,
hours
thanks for
later,
telling that story.
So I was truthful.
Forgiveness. We still like each other. All right, that's the big point. Okay. So, spiritually, there needs to be an attachment and a connection and a depth to your relationship. Secondly, emotionally, there needs to be a depth and an attachment to your relationship. So God says in that story with Adam and Eve, I want you to leave and cleave, right? I want you to leave your mother and father. Remember that sermon where he's marrying Adam and Eve? Leave your mother and father and be united to your wife, and the two will become one flesh. So, and that's interestingly specifically said to men. Leave your mother and father, which is fascinating, right? Because the women in the room are like, yeah, exactly. Like, I don't need your eyeballs telling me you don't make spaghetti like my mom makes it, whatever. It's like, shut up. You have left your mother. I am not your mom. And so there's like a specific, he's checking right now. He's like, no way. He's got to be addressing both of them. No, that is just the man. That's interesting. So there's a leave and a cleave. And that leave and cleave, listen, is an emotional attachment that has to happen. And I know that when you say that, of course you're going to hear that in a marriage coming, And a lot of men and women, depending on how you're wired, go, that's not my thing. Like, I don't want to just emotionally attach it. And they have visions and ideas about what that is. And you've talked to me about, that's not really what I'm looking for. I don't need you coming home and sitting,
Yes, for
eye
sure.
to eye for 45 minutes saying, how was your day? How do you feel? Like, that's how much, like, I've never talked to a group of people who are like, I want to work 8-hour, 9-hour days and come home and then sit and debrief for an hour with someone about how they feel about life. Like, no.
Yeah, just like spiritually, we have these conceptions of what it should look like. And emotionally, it's often that, where we shy away. And not just men. I don't want that either. I don't want to come home and have to sit face to face with you. I got things to do.
Totally, yeah.
But it's the idea of, it's more than that. It's more of sitting down and having your hour talk. It's, how are you having fun together? Like, how are you actually emotionally connecting? How are you enjoying your time together? We laugh together, we have fun, we joke about each other, but it's fun. We enjoy just being together. And I'm gonna go on a ledge, and going back to the mother-in-law thing for a minute, that everybody in this room has had issues at some point with a mother-in-law. And I often sit with women, and it could be on both sides, but I often sit with women, because that would be weird if I'm just sitting down with men having conversations.
Yeah, when does that happen?
So I'm sitting down with these women, and the issues that they have with their mother-in-laws, I resonate with so well, because it's not necessarily an issue between you and your mother-in-law. It's an issue between you and your spouse. It's an issue of, am I the person that you love and cherish the most? Like, are we on the same team here? And early on in our marriage, I remember, I would literally hear her voice coming through his mouth. And I'd be like, that was clearly your mom fed you that to tell me I'm not doing this right. Like, this isn't you. And all of a sudden something switched, where one day he took my side and he went to bat. He had the conversations, and no longer did I have to battle it out, because he took ownership. He had that relationship, those hard conversations he took on with his own parent. And so this works on both sides. You need to take ownership for your own parents and have those hard conversations to save your spouse from, and that changed our relationship.
Yeah, the big idea here, guys, is, and I think this is it sounds really cliche, but the point is, the goal of your marriage is actually friendship. There was a study done years ago out of corporations and businesses, and why people stay at their workplace. And the number 2 reason why people stay at their job is they found a friend. Which is really strange, because you'd think it'd be salary and money and they feel whatever. It's like, I made a friend. Now imagine that could happen with your spouse. Like, you woke up every day and it wasn't like, oh, this person I'm kind of grinding to be. It's like, I actually not love, but like this person. That's the goal. And I remember a couple of years ago, we were in Dallas, we were walking around, and the kids were at home, and we were kind of hanging out. We were kind of hand in hand, walking to this little, shopping. And Erin just says, you know what? When the kids are gone, I think we're gonna be good, because we actually like each other, right? And it's like, how many couples just kind of grind it out during the kids' years, the kids move on, and you don't even know or like the person that you're sitting in this house with, because you never became friends. You never actually related to each other in a friendship. And the same is true about parenting. We're trying to kind of weave both marriage and parenting principles in here, but it's the same with, one of the worst pieces of advice people can say is, don't become friends with your kids. Guys, become friends with your kids. That's a beautiful thing. Of course, you still have the thing, but that relationship, that attachment needs to happen relationally. Now, Erin actually taught me this in our marriage about our kids, because I have 3 daughters, okay? So you can pray for me. I got 15, 13, and 10. And I think like an 80s dad, right? So I'm just like everything they do and say, I picture them as a 30-year-old doing and saying it. So then I just try to cut it then. So it's like, she's 10. That's not gonna work at the workplace. Don't say that, never say it, whatever. So I'm constantly, it's like, consequences is the way to teach children stuff, right? So they do something bad, throw them up in the room for a week, because that's how I was raised. I was a latchkey kid in the 80s. It was like, go to your, and there was no fun. I'd just sit in my bedroom and stare at my mirror and listen to Counting Crows and think about stuff for a week. And that's like how I became a human being. So then that's how I try to parent my kids, my 3 daughters. And Erin taught me, bro, you can't, like, so.
Well, you do have a tone issue. They hear you talking.
See, this is what she always says.
It's the approach.
Suppose they have like a tone problem, right? When I talk to them, like, and I'm like, no, that's not what see, they're all like, what did he mean? What did he mean? But I didn't say that. It's just what, I guess, my tone. So Erin's away with her girlfriends, and I'm at home with the kids. 3 daughters, ready to get in the car. This is like a few months ago. And they said, can we do hot chocolates when we get in the car? Right, that sounds fun. I was like, that just sounds like an utter disaster, all right? So my answer was no. You can't do hot chocolates. You're gonna spill it, it's gonna go on the thing. No, Daddy, come on here. So I'm like, fine, whatever. That's a good parenting tip. The kids complain enough, just do that. So I was like, okay, fine. So they fill up their hot chocolates. We're not even at the front door. And the 10-year-old, boom, on the carpet, hot chocolate all over the place. So I went into 80s dad mode. There's consequence. What the heck? What's going on? See, I told you. I'm the man. I know what's right. The other 2 start texting Erin, right? This is what Dad's saying.
There may have been video recordings sent
what?
to me.
I didn't know that. Look at his tone. And then she texts me back. I didn't know the kids had texted her, so it was kind of like she texted me out of the blue. I'm like, oh my goodness, the Holy Spirit must be talking right now. Meanwhile, I got 2 morons in the next room going, I ain't saying this. But she texts me this line that kind of forever changed my philosophy on parenting, at least daughters. She said, remember.
And sons, it fits with sons too.
It's always relationship over rules. And that changed my whole philosophy on this. Because when your kids are 30, yeah, of course there's discipline, but the relationship you built with that kid, that's why they love on you when they're 30 and they come back around. That's why they're your friends when they grow up. It's not because you create a bunch of rules in their life. Some of those things can be figured out as they go. But one of the big principles is man, don't treat a 10-year-old and project them to a 30-year-old and think that you're actually raising them well. It's all about that attachment.
That's right. And the relationship adds currency. So when you have to have the hard conversations, it's not without discipline. Obviously, there's rules, there's discipline. But the relationship takes precedence. So this tone that we're talking about here.
Hypothetically.
This hypothetical tone. And we don't always get it right. None of us, we all have room to start fresh, to start over.
Let's talk about what are you working on?
But it's all about the relationship builds the currency, which builds the trust, so that you're able to parent in a way. It always goes to that grace and truth. Grace and truth.
John chapter 1, full of grace, full of truth. And one of the things that's been really cool over the last bunch of years, I've started to see that friendship build with my kids, where it's like these girls, it's like we're watching movies together, we're exegetes, like it's stuff that they've come into my world a bit. I've leaned into their world. And now
I've opened up and allowed them to watch certain movies because they're with Dad.
Yeah, well, Erin, like.
Just don't judge us when he says a movie title, please.
Well, it's like when Erin's growing up, it's like all these Hallmark movies that the girls are watching. It's like, oh, big businesswoman from New York goes back to her small town and learns a great lesson from the lumberjack. It's like, whatever. And
if you've seen one, you've seen them all.
Right. And it's like just on repeat. I'm like, I think we've seen this one. It's like, no, this is brand new.
It's brand new this year.
Cutting edge.
Candace Cameron's in all of them.
But, so my daughters have now moved into like, Mom, can I go watch like Inception with Dad again? Like we're exegeting the Dark Knight together and Interstellar and how time works. And it's like my kids are now trading her out for me and it's legit, right? So it's like, now I'm winning. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Because
Anyway.
I'm teaching you how to win.
Yeah.
So it all works out. And even with our currency with Mark and I, it wasn't always that way. Early on, I always questioned whether I was the backup plan. We dated for 5 years and then we got married, and I would just be at home when he'd be out with his buddies constantly. The night we got home from our honeymoon, our place wasn't ready yet, and so I got to move back into Mark's childhood bedroom. Kate Winslet above us. Yeah, the single bed, and we get back, and I'm
Why
like,
was Kate Winslet there? Well, that's kind
you
of
were
weird.
obsessed with Titanic.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
The
He wrote
Titanic
a sequel
poster.
to Titanic as well. Side note, fun fact. He wrote a sequel to Titanic, don't do this. And we were dating, and he's like, oh, I'll print you off a copy. I wrote this sequel. And while I'm standing behind the man, he erases, it says, written and inspired by my one true love. And he erases his ex's name and types mine in while I'm standing there. That's how this guy rolled back then.
Wow.
And so.
In front of all these nice people.
So.
They're gonna throw me under the bus.
So we get back from our honeymoon, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. My parents live 10 minutes down the road, but I'll move back into your childhood bedroom. But at least you're here with me, so that's cool. And he's like, yeah, just so you know, Lord of the Rings came out tonight, so I'm heading to the theater with my friends. Should I just go home then to my bedroom? That's how we rolled. And then we moved out to BC 6 months later, and I thought, okay, this is good. Like, not that I want to control him and have him all to myself. I want some space too, but this is going to change his allegiance. He's not going to be all about his friends. He's going to connect with me more. And I am not joking. We were 2 days in BC, did not know one person. And he left me 2 days in to go play poker with some random guys he met through our landlord. And I'm like, okay, so this is my life. This is my life. And then I had to start thinking, okay, I guess I need to entertain for him to stay home with me. So I couldn't just. Yeah.
No, not like that. When we were first married, it's like I'm used to going out every night. We get married, first time at home, it's like she's got a little blanket around her toes and she's got a cup of tea. And I'm like, what are we doing tonight? She's like, this. I'm like, what do you mean this? I gotta go, I gotta get out. I started wigging out. I'm like, but what are we gonna no, it's this. This is the rest of your life. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so what actually took the time, the beautiful part about it is now, I would choose that. That's the attachment piece. That's the emotional connection that's happened. Where she is literally, as cheesy as it sounds, my best friend. And
besties,
so that,
whenever he says it, I'm like, besties, we should get necklaces
No,
made.
we shouldn't.
I find it sounds cheesy.
Okay, so we have one final point to tell you, which we only have 2 minutes for, and it's about sex. So we've kind of,
I guess we should just wrap it up.
Yeah.
Let's
pray together.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it. Hope we felt your heartfelt needs.
So
we're good.
Really quickly, physically is the third component of your attachment and connection. Of course, God makes them naked in the garden and says, be fruitful and multiply. So there's this point about sexuality. We have a lot of stuff to say on it. We don't have time. But point is, we do a lot of marriage counseling with couples. And one of the big things that you've got to look at is unmet expectations when it comes to sexuality. You got to be talking this stuff out. In premarital counseling, I remember sitting with couples, literally one guy, I'm like, okay, how many times do you think you're going to have sex per week? And the guy, no joke, he goes, 13. Twice? Okay, right. Twice every day and once on Sunday. That was literally the answer. Because it's the Sabbath.
Because it's the day of rest.
Right? And we're all laughing because most of you, that's not actually happening. I know some of you think it is, it's happening with me, but no, it's not. So it's just like this unmet expectation of, one of the huge things is you guys have all these expectations. You got to be able to talk about the expectations because there's things being unspoken in this room right now about sexuality that you're starting to resent each other about. That you have unmet expectations about certain things. One of the great challenges and action points that I'll tell you is sexually, you got to go home and talk about this stuff. I read about one couple, they were at a marriage conference like this, and one of the challenges was you got to go home and talk to your spouse about kind of that one sexual thing that you wanted to talk about, a fantasy, a thing that you've always kind of wanted to do. You got to be able to have that open conversation with them. And the lady was like, all right, so the husband sat down, he told his, and then he's like, okay, what's yours? She was like this 60-year-old lady. She's like, I can't tell you after all these years of marriage. He's like, come on. She's like, okay, fine. I'd love you to suck my toes in bed.
Might be your thing. Sorry for the face. Might be yours.
Yeah, if it's yours, it's cool. But it's like, and he was like, oh my goodness, like, this is so crazy. Let's try it. And he liked it and she liked it. And it's like, you gotta be able to have those open conversations, because I feel like in the church, we're just doing a really bad job about talking about sexuality openly. And we need to do it, like, guys, this is just part of life. We need to talk about it. So in the last Blue Oaks, they asked a question. It was a bunch of Q&A. We had time for Q&A. And they're like, hey, can we use vibrators and sex toys in our marriages? And so we did a 10-minute piece on vibrators and sex toys. You have to get the audio from over there. Go ahead.
Thank you. But on that note, I find, especially in women, men, they talk on the golf course together about generally they talk a little bit more open about it, and generally it works in a different way. Women can spend years and years without ever having a conversation with somebody. If it's not working, you need to figure out how to make it work. Or of course, if you've never had an orgasm, it's not gonna be fun. Like, it'd be like, what was the point of that? It's not just about the other person. God made us so that both of us can have pleasure together. And that is the combining of one another. So we need to figure out how to have these conversations. And I talk openly about this because it is such an important conversation to be having, and to know that you're not abnormal. You need to be seeking counsel. Talk to somebody who is comfortable in this area. I just had a conversation recently. There was a couple women, and they know that I'm open in this area, and life had changed for them. I had a hysterectomy many years ago, and so I know how our bodies change as we go through perimenopause, all this stuff. As you evolve, it changes. And these women said, you know what, it just doesn't work for me anymore. And
because there's a high percentage of women who don't have orgasms, they never have orgasms, they think that's just part of life, and they don't realize there are actually ways to have orgasms. You gotta study it and teach your husband and so on.
That's right.
So this is what
and so this woman said, it's just not working, and I don't know what to do. And I gave her a couple recommendations. And I said, have you tried this? And she's like, no, I don't. I'm just, you know what? She got uncomfortable, and she's like, you know what? I'm just gonna wait and see if my husband introduces that, if we figure that out. And I was like, but you're the one that has the issue in this area. He's never gonna figure it out, because I guarantee.
Definitely, all the guys are like,
I guarantee
definitely won't figure it out.
He doesn't even know that this is a concern for you. Yeah. So stop faking it and figure out how to make it work. Have these conversations, because when we are physically connected, or when we're spiritually connected and emotionally connected, these conversations should be happening.
Yeah.
Because you're safe. You're with this partner that you're safe with. So we need to start having these conversations with one another.
And one of the things we do, because it's not just about quantity, but about quality. So we did a survey of 7,000 people at our church, and it was like 80% of them said it's not just about quantity. What I actually want is quality. You could be having sex 3, 4, or 5 times a week, whatever, but if it's just, you're just mailing it in, who's all that excited about that? It's right? It's like, great. It's like, check a box, great. It happened, but it wasn't like fun. It just kind of happened. It's like, quality is actually a hugely important part of sexuality.
And if you're at a season in life, often this is when our kids are young and you're just trying to pull it together. If you're having 0, and people hate when I say put it on the calendar, have a day of the week where it's scheduled. People are like, oh, you don't schedule that. That's so clinical. It's like, no, if you're having 0, a schedule is better. At least 100%. It's something to look forward and be forward focusing on. We need to make this a priority in our relationships.
I think people have this vision of sex that we get from movies, where it's like, it's gotta be like raining and you come and you rip your shirt off, like, And it's like in the kitchen and it's so just like in the moment, I couldn't help it. It's like, no, Tuesday at 8 p.m. is just, it's just as sexy, man, because then you know, like if you're like mentally, you gotta be like, okay, I don't feel like it, but he's coming home, I gotta get in the game. Let's go, it's happening. And then the guy's at work and he's kind of getting jacked up because he knows what's going on. Like it's kind of a thing. Scheduling sex is not a bad thing. And Erin and I work with so many couples around this stuff. It's all these unspoken stuff about all these kind of things. It's like we actually have a passion for people to flourish in this area in so many ways. Anyway, how do you want to end
it's
this?
like a stool too, where all three work together. You can't have a two-legged stool and expect to stay up. All of these work in sync, both for connection and also for protection. Mm-hmm. Because there will be seasons where one of these areas you'll be emotionally spent. Maybe you've lost a loved one or lost a job, whatever it might be, and that will be out of sync. And the other two can help carry it. Mm-hmm. There was a season early in our marriage, I had some health problems and had many surgeries. And we weren't sure if me and my baby would make it. And from that on, we had a season in time where it didn't work. We weren't able to have sex. And it was like, if that was all we had, then what would have happened then? If all our eggs were in that basket, but no, we had the emotional side. We had the friendship by that point, because early on, I would have not felt like I was enough if that was the only thing, but we had built that connection. We had built that connectivity in order to be able to still flourish and move forward.
So let me give you one Bible passage that sums all this up. And it's what Francis Chan calls the most important Bible passage in regard to marriage in the entire Bible. And it's Philippians 2, and it has everything to do with the physical, sexual piece, the emotional and the spiritual attachment. Philippians 2, verse 3-4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition. Rather, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but to the interests of the others. So think about that in regard to sexuality. Think about that in regard to your emotional connection. Think about that in regard to your spiritual connection. How do you look at the other person and say what they're saying is more important than what I'm saying? I'm gonna love and serve them the way they wanna be loved and served, not necessarily the way I wanna be loved and served. It doesn't always have to mean you love someone according, because that might not be their love language. The love and respect thing. You gotta respect, not just love. All of those pieces come together, and then that starts to build trust in the relationship. Because if you lack, Stephen Covey, who's this business writer, years ago wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. You wanna wonder why things bog down in your marriage? Sometimes it's a trust issue. Trust has been broken, trust lacks. I had a couple in my office, we were doing marriage counseling, and I was trying to hit all their issues. And she was like a person who didn't believe in vaccines, and she's like, we can never get it, and she's getting all these notices, and never get it, and it's gonna hurt your body, all this stuff, going, and then they were fighting, and finally he just goes, I already got it a month ago. And she's like, no! And like just starts to bawl and like runs out of the office, pulls herself together for 15 minutes, comes back, and he's like, it's the same thing I did with our vasectomy. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I just went and got one of those too. I mean, she was nagging on about it, and I just went and got it. I'm like, okay, don't do that, all right? So what that does is destroys trust. And when you've destroyed trust, it's very hard to win it back. And so even when you're trying to build trust and you're trying to flourish and you're trying to build intimacy, Philippians 2, keep coming back to it. I gotta keep thinking of them more than I'm thinking of me. That's the fight with your natural self that only the Spirit of God can do. He changes not what you do, but what you want to do. He changes the way that you can love and serve someone so that they flourish, not so all the time that you're flourishing. That's the way you're gonna actually flourish in your marriage. So, Lord, we're so thankful that you've given us this thing called marriage and parenting that we get to actually do. You've entrusted us, and I pray that this room stewards it well. I pray that there's so much grace and forgiveness in this room that we expect and hope that you give us all this grace, all this forgiveness in our life. I pray that that is able to actually then stream out horizontally toward our spouse and our kids, and that this room, from being here this weekend, would actually have marriages that just show the picture of the gospel to the world, which is what Ephesians 5 says marriage is. It's a picture of Christ in the church, and that the world would look in at the marriages that are flourishing in this room and go, I wanna know Jesus because of this. That's the work you would do, that you would heal brokenness and pain and unforgiveness in this room so that we would leave here deeper, better, far more intentional and active toward pursuing flourishing versus just surviving. In Jesus' great name we pray, amen.